So what is your top priority concerning frontline workers across your state, and do you currently have a plan to address any issues?
All right. So yeah, I think we have to be honest about the delineation between what the federal government can do and what the state government can do. I think as a plan to make sure that we can stand with frontline workers, but more importantly, stand with freedom again, we have to ensure federal level that we codify into law the fact that you cannot mandate that people have to be taking vaccines for the purpose of actually maintaining employment in such a manner in the cases of such a once in a generational pandemic, and certainly to ensure that you cannot strip people of benefits they have already earned by virtue of your decision to make with mandates. I don't. I mean, for me, I mean, not to extrapolate here, but the notion that you would penalize people and deny them benefits that were promised to them and that they earned strictly because they don't do what you want them to do. It seems to, for me, be the canary in the coal mine that shows that this has very little to do with science and everything to do with control. And so for me, the issue on that particular question is to simply say that we have to make sure that people have a right at the federal level to make choices about their health, about the vaccines for themselves based on the information they have at their disposal. And they cannot be retaliated against by their own government for the purposes of trying to effectively leverage them into doing what they want them to do.
The nation, as well as New York State, is experiencing a rise in all crime. What do you believe is the cause of this?
Look, I've said many times it starts with the three most dangerous words and destructive words in modern politics: defunding the police. That was the beginning of this slide to what we see now. We had 12 major cities hit all-time highs for homicide. We saw a 125% increase in ambush assaults on law enforcement in 2021. 2021 became the most dangerous year to wear a badge in the history of this nation, eclipsing the violence against police we saw during Prohibition, eclipsing the violence of police we saw during the 60s and 70s when we had race riots. And so I think that speaks volumes for how we have allowed this permissiveness for lawlessness to be entered into the drinking water of society, where we now know that the needs of the criminal have been elevated over our responsibility to our citizens and our obligation to those members of law enforcement who raise their hand to do a very difficult job on behalf of a grateful society. So that to me is the problem. It starts there, starts with the silence of individuals who are old enough, wise enough, and experienced enough to have known better, should have known what a reckless policy this was and what the inevitable outcome would have been. Somebody like Chuck Schumer, who's been down there for 42 years, he said nothing, he did nothing, and now the results speak for themselves. And so for me, in my capacity as a United States Senator, I would seek to leverage the power of federal spending to make sure that you can never defund police without giving us a data-driven reason that shows that that decision is going to actually improve safety for our communities and improve the ability of law enforcement to do their job. And absent of that, you won't be receiving any federal dollars to do whatever you're trying to do. Because I remind people, many of the tasks that they want to do, whether you're talking about an education, whether you're talking about public safety, whether you're talking about infrastructure, most of those local projects have some form, if not a robust form, of federal dollars behind it. And so we can leverage those federal dollars to nudge these municipalities towards doing the right thing and making sure that they're not leaving society vulnerable for the sake of political power. Because let's be very clear, this was all political. There was no public safety impetus for doing this defunding of law enforcement. It was all about fulfilling an agenda that was derived from a political base that they wanted to hold on to in the interest of trying to win an election in 2020.
All right, so question 3. What is your stance on gun control?
I mean, I think the phrase itself is a problem. When you start talking about what actually needs to happen in this country, I always remind people, let's be brutally honest, the Second Amendment isn't for pheasants. It's to make sure that all the other amendments are still worth the paper it's written on. And so, for me, it's an uncomfortable conversation, but we have to just be honest about the fact that people have a constitutional right to defend themselves. People have a constitutional right to bear arms. And yes, we can have conversations about how we can have a safer society. But in the case of the most recent con, as I've called it, the latest gun legislation that they tried to put in place, where they said they were trying to keep children safe. Well, I've got some stats for them. You know, my hometown of Yonkers, Yonkers, the third largest city in this state. We have over 27,000 students. The budget to fix our crumbling public schools, because the average school building in my hometown is 75 years old, is $2 billion. So how do you have a national plan to keep children safe across the country that only includes $300 million? The answer is you don't. The answer is that they use dead children as the catalyst to pass gun legislation that in many ways doesn't keep anybody any safer, but only takes firearms out of the hands of legal gun owners. So that, to me, is my perspective. We shouldn't be passing any laws, and certainly as it pertains to guns, my philosophy doesn't change. Every law that we pass should be actually keeping people safer. You show me how you're passing a law that can keep people safer, and I'm all in with you. But absent of that, we certainly shouldn't be trampling on people's constitutional rights for the purposes of virtue signaling to a small portion of society that doesn't actually have to deal with the real violence that is the impetus for people to go out there and get the guns in the first place.
Would you support any bills that would reduce the benefits, either health care and pay, of retired workers?
No, I think for me, as I've said many times, America is a promise that we make to our citizens and a promise that we make to the world. And anything that we do that diminishes that promise, that goes back on our word, is a betrayal of America. And so, yes, we know that we have financial problems, that sometimes people have to come to the table in good faith and renegotiate. But holding a gun to the head of labor and telling them that they have to give up benefits that they worked hard for, to give up concessions that they made. I mean, I always remind people, I mean, there's a reason why the pay is what it is and the benefits are what they are, because people have exchanged pay for the benefits. If you cut the benefits, then you're effectively breaking a deal that they can't actually go and recuperate what they made that concession for in the first place. So I think for me, we have to have a holistic approach to everything. We have to honor the promises that were made. And if we're going to say that society needs us to make a pivot, then that pivot has to be made in good faith with labor at the table, with the understanding that the concessions that they've already made are part of the actual contracts that are in place to begin with.
So frontline workers, we have some presumptive protections, such as heart bills. We have a heart bill for police officers and firefighters, where if they become disabled due to an illness from their heart, it's presumed that that illness happened in the line of duty. Would you be in support of other protections, possibly adding lung protection to police officers? Currently, firefighters do have this protection because they run into smoke. But as we've seen with COVID-19, we've seen a lot of guys in law enforcement get injured, or if something else happens in the future, we have some other type of thing that's harmful to our workers, to healthcare workers, law enforcement, or firefighters. Would you be in support of any presumptive protections for frontline workers?
I think we have to be. I think the honest truth is that as we sit here today, we have no idea what the long-term impact of COVID is going to be, and certainly the long-term impact of individuals who day after day were exposed to COVID. So we have to make provisions to ensure, similar to what we did in the aftermath of 9/11, to make sure that whatever the healthcare outcomes are from people that we know were willingly exposed to this plague day after day after day, that they get the benefits that they deserve. I think you have to do that. So yes, a short answer, yes. I think that we have to make those concessions. I think we have to put those things in place to make sure that people have the protection that they need.
Today, New York State Governor Kathy Hochul said she will not be renewing the emergency order for COVID-19. In your opinion, do you believe the measures that are currently in place still today is in COVID? She said she's not going to resign on it. She's not going to re-sign it. But do you believe that the emergency measures in New York State that are currently in place for COVID, monkeypox, and polio are being used properly?
Well, no, they're not. I mean, they're an abuse of power. To be clear, I'm pretty sure the only reason that she is not going to renew the emergency powers is because she got caught in what is arguably one of the worst kickback schemes that we've seen in this state in modern history. where somebody was effectively using the emergency powers to give somebody who was given their campaign money an exorbitant, nearly double the market price, with zero mechanism to cancel the contract. I mean, it's so shocking. It's almost hard to put into words. So again, even when people in power in New York State do the right thing, they rarely do it for the right reasons. So for me, all the mandates need to go. The reality is that monkeypox has barely killed anyone around the world. It's certainly not killing people here in New York. If we're being brutally honest about the fact, your average New Yorker is not at risk at actually contracting monkeypox. That does not mean that we should not be taking every single precaution necessary to ensure that any portion of society is not getting the treatment they deserve, is not getting the information they need to take preventative actions. But most assuredly, to have this type of pervasive, broad brush mandates put in place is certainly not something that we should be encouraging. And so I'm happy that she's not going to renew the Emergency Acts. But as far as making sure and allowing these policies that are designed to be short-term remedies before we can actually figure out what are the long-term implications going on month after month, day after day. That's not America. That is not what the powers are designed to do. And in many ways, it makes it more difficult for us to respond to a real emergency when the emergency powers have been used so pervasively.
Do you support safer work environments for medical staff and higher levels of care for patients, such as possibly instilling a nurse to patient ratio? And another thing that we've been hearing from a lot of our members, our nurses, is that they're not afforded the same protections as police officers or peace officers, where if you do assault a peace officer, it's a higher charge. It's not just a basic assault of charge. Do you support greater measures for healthcare workers?
Yeah, so I mean, I think first and foremost, I mean, look, you assault the man, the conductor on the train, you're going to do probably 5 years. So the notion that we're not giving those same protections to frontline workers who, in many regards, are having more regular interactions with people who are more likely to assault them than the train conductor, who invariably is locked in the conductor's booth, doesn't make much sense to me. So I think that's certainly something that right away we could do, not just at the state level, but obviously running for U.S. Senate at the federal level as well. There's no reason why we couldn't do that and making that a federal offense. I think beyond that, I think to your point, look, there's a lot of stuff that we can do to make the job more manageable. Certainly having a ratio would be helpful. I think that's good for the nurses. I think it's also good for the patients. And figuring out what the mechanism to do that. I would be dishonest for me to sit here and say that I know exactly how you're going to pay for it. But I do know that I think that there are a lot of ways that we can find at the federal level to support nudging municipalities, giving them the support from the federal level to do so. I'll just say this. We seem to find a new couple $1 billion every day to send to Ukraine. And it's a worthy cause. But let's be very clear. I've got people in Jackson, Mississippi without clean water to drink or take a bath. I've got frontline workers who don't have the resources they need to properly care for their patients, and by extension, are being overtaxed and overburdened. So let's not pretend that America, we're the great stewards of resources that we like to pretend that we are. So the money is there to be found. It's going to take a diligent effort, line by line approach, going through these budgets to figure out where is the waste, where can we cut back, and where can we reallocate the resources. But I can certainly say that it is there to be found. And with your help, when we get down to DC, we can go about the work of getting that done.
Ready. But currently, cops, firefighters, EMS, and healthcare workers have been fired, placed on leave without pay, or forced to retire early over vaccine mandates. Do you support this? And if not, was there anything you could do at the federal level to get us back to work?
Certainly. I think that, again, people underestimate the power of the federal government. What the power of the federal government has in spades is the power of the purse. And we can certainly pass legislation tomorrow that says your federal dollars you need for your roads, the federal dollars you need for your bridges, the federal dollars you need for law enforcement, the federal dollars you need for education. You won't get a dime of it if you're not hiring back all of your police officers with back pay. hiring back all of your first responders and members of law enforcement writ large with back pay. That is something that we could do tomorrow. And again, we can't force the city of New York or the state of New York to do it, but let's be very clear, they need that money. And so, absent of the money, they couldn't run the state. And so, my bet is that most states would take the money, they would hire back the first responders. We would make those workers whole, but more importantly, we would make those families whole. And more important than that, we would actually be doing what this nation is designed to be doing, which is giving people the choice over their own lives, control over their own life, honoring their God-given individual rights.
Do you support everyone having equal access to all aspects of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 for all applicable federal, state, and city OEO laws?
Yeah, look, so I think the civil rights laws of 1964, right, we're really talking about public accommodations, freedom for it to be from discrimination, things of that nature. I think a lot of that was productive. I think the problem was, at some point you try to stretch it so far to include so many people that the rubber band snaps and the whole thing just becomes a farce. And so I think that we have to just go back to the original intent. What was the intent? To make sure that people who, by virtue of how they presented in society, could be discriminated against by no other reason, by something they had no choice over, something they couldn't choose. I think that anything that we can do to increase access to job opportunities, to educational opportunities, that prevents the oldest stain on the American tapestry from rearing its ugly head, that pernicious impact of hatred born out of racism. We should do everything we should do about it. But beyond that, I think we start getting to the point where we start to make a mockery of the law if we're just applying it to every single person who shows up and says, I feel as if I've been discriminated against, when in some ways there may be something happening that is inappropriate. But does it rise to the level of something that should be receiving federal benefits of discrimination against? I don't necessarily think that's always the case. So we should have a more equitable society. It's our responsibility as Americans to fight for that more equitable society. But trying to, again, have a one-size-fits-all solution to discrimination, it just doesn't make any sense. And in many ways, actually doesn't allow us to fight the real, honest-to-God vestiges of racism that we still have to this day.
Awesome. Thank you.